I am Brad Keelor. He is Russell Green. Coming up next on Director's Cut, find out his tale of spice and how he became the 2024 Matt Evans Hot Sauce Challenge champion.
He's got a brand new car, looks like a Jaguar. It's got leather seats, it's got a CD player.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week until I am relieved of my duties at GI, I sit down with a different Geo-Institute member who has stories to tell. Some of them are personal, some are professional, all of them 100% are fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, after you watch this, I guess I was going to say beautiful. Are the interviews beautiful? They could be. After you watch this amazing interview today, how about that? Head over to geo-institute.org, and there you will find out just legions of things, including that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And if you like what you see today, and I always feel very strongly that you will, viewers, you should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. With that welcome out of the way, we bring in our guest he's in the same state I'm in, but just at the opposite corner of it. Coming to us from Blacksburg, Virginia, where he is a faculty member at, I never get the full name right, so we will just call it Virginia Tech. It is Russell Green. Russell, welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me. It's exciting to be here. And Virginia Tech is its legal name, as well as Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. So somewhat like Georgia Tech and Georgia Institute of Technology, we have two names that are both official.
It's always that institute that trips me up. And yet I remember VPI, but still I don't get it. We have 10 questions for you, the same way that we do for everybody every week. And 2 of them are the same as every week. And we start with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
So I'm a professor of civil and environmental engineering with a focus on geotechnical engineering. So that entails teaching courses focused on civil, but primarily geotechnical engineering, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, and then also performing research. And again, mostly it's focused on geotechnical engineering.
Beautifully succinct. Now that I've asked, like 100 faculty members that question, I kind of know what to expect. And
so
that means
it's hard to make that sound really exciting. It is actually exciting, but to describe it shortly in 45 seconds, it may be a little bit difficult to make it exciting.
It's okay. Everybody knows who you are now, and that lays our baseline. And then, as is tradition, we get right into the hard-hitting journalistic questions that always follow that. I thought of this question as I was reading the physical newspaper that I have delivered to my house 7 days a week. So, Russell, you're the lucky recipient of it. What's the last printed publication of any kind that you held in your hands and read?
So usually journal papers, and I would have to say this actually was a peer report. So I've actually overdue on writing a book chapter that I committed to, and I'm doing background reading for that. And as part of that, I collected all the publications and printed them out. And I just came back from UC Berkeley for an honorary symposium, memorial symposium, Professor Jim Mitchell. And so on the plane, I took the opportunity of pulling these out and reading. So journal papers are typically it, but peer reports related to geotechnical earthquake engineering, and in this case, in probabilistic seismic hazard analysis and site response analysis.
So where's your threshold for hitting Control P or selecting print from that pull down menu? I mean, how do you, I print almost nothing now, I've realized. Somebody gives me a piece of paper, I hold on to it forever. but I don't generally print. How do you make that decision now? And has the threshold changed over the years?
Um, it's changing, but very slowly. So before everything was printed, now probably 90% is printed. And I mentioned that my background is blurred. If I took another orientation, you would see how much I have printed out. So almost everything gets printed out, and I mark it up and underline it and, mark it in red and highlight it and then put it in a stack that's, red, and I, have tabs on it. So 90% of what I read is hard copy.
Do you print emails?
Um, it depends. So I usually, if they're an important email, I usually print it to PDF and then save it in a file so it's electronic, so I don't have to search my inbox. I can go and I have it in a PDF. And then depending on whether I need it for something, then I print it and then bring the hard copy. So first it goes to print to PDF and then print to hard copy. But that's, only important ones that are related to different projects and I need to have readily available without trying to search. The printed ones would be probably 1%. I up to probably 150 emails a day. So just even printing 1% of them is still quite a bit.
So for those of you who go to visit Russell, and if you look around his office and you see a printed email from yourself, I guess you would know where you rank. That would be a pretty big honor, right? The third question that we ask in the interview is always the research or practice question. This week, we will not deviate from that, just as we have not in any episode of Director's Cut. I don't know why I ever would, but we're going to stick with it this week, too. You are an earthquake engineering guy, Russell. When I hear your name, that's actually the first thing I think of, which I don't know if that's good or bad. I think it's probably good. You're going to walk us through how you got started in this field and how it led to what you're doing today.
So I did my undergraduate at RPI, and I finished I had worked in the Marine Corps prior to that, and so I was a little bit older, but not much older. The economy wasn't great, and RPI at that time, you could sign up for 5 interviews, and it was all coordinated through one office. And that if someone didn't show up for the interview, you still didn't get an additional one. So you could sign up for 5 companies. If the company ended up not coming up, that was too bad. If the company came and wasn't hiring and was just collecting resumes, that was too bad. So you had to go a little bit extra in order to find jobs. And so I went and I looked at all the letters. So they had a big filing cabinet, and I went through, and there was a new government agency that was looking for an earthquake engineer. And I'm thinking, I don't know who does earthquake engineering other than civil engineers, so I'm going to go ahead. Well, they wouldn't let me sign up for that because my degree was in civil engineering. It wasn't civil and environmental at RPI at that time. So I had to wait outside the office and wait for the person to come out from the interview. And I asked him if he would interview me, and he said yes, and he added me on the list. So my first job was actually hired as an earthquake engineer. And I didn't know much about it. I had taken some courses that got on the peripheral of it, but they understood that. They were looking for a junior person that they could train. And so now I ended up focusing early on seismology because the more senior earthquake engineers all had more classically trained structural earthquake engineers, and they didn't know a lot about the seismology or geotech. And so they kind of relegated all of that to me. So by default, I kind of first started focusing on seismic hazard analysis and then geotech aspects, and have continued that. That was first working, and I worked with the government for about 7 years. Went back to school, got my master's, and went back and got my PhD. But my theme of my research, as both for my master's thesis and PhD thesis, was earthquake engineering and seismic hazard analysis, and then, of course, continuing on the research today. And so most of my research focuses right now on liquefaction evaluations, but also different aspects of seismic hazard analysis.
So we're going to take you way back to the beginning when you first started that first job. Did you ever have a moment where you were like, what am I doing? Or did you know right from the start that was where you belonged and that was what you wanted to do?
It was, I would say, what am I doing more from a standpoint that it was overwhelming. The projects that I worked on to begin with, the Cold War had just ended. I was working for a regulator that was overseeing the production and disassembling at that time of nuclear weapons. So you had all these production facilities that had no regulation ever because it was for national security reasons. And now we were going to go in and see what was there and what the hazards were or risks. And compared to a commercial nuclear plant, which is heavily regulated and in good shape, that wasn't what we found. And so this was overwhelming. You had buildings that you had no blueprints for, so you didn't know what they were designed for. Retrofits, they were contaminated, so retrofitting them wasn't a trivial thing. And you had located in different places across the country, and so your seismic hazard ranged, and so you couldn't just use the typical building code. And I ended up working with some fairly prominent consultants that were very patient and educated me. But the problems were overwhelming. So that's where I would say, what am I doing here? But it intrigued me. I wanted to learn more. And that was the reason why I went and got a master's and a PhD.
And I have to imagine that looking back at that now, I mean, as daunting as those problems were at that time, it's really cool to be a part of that solution, right? I mean, you have to have fond memories of this now, I would think.
It was particularly when you went to old facilities that Fermi, there was Fermi's chair, there was his desk, there was
Wow.
some really giants, and they were almost like time capsules because they were used for a period of time and then closed, and then because of the radiation exposure, they had limited access. So yes, it was very, very interesting. And prior to this, although not directly related, was in the Marine Corps and lived not too far from Hiroshima, stationed not too far from Hiroshima. So I saw the effects of nuclear weapons firsthand. So then kind of working backwards to the facilities that, were producing the weapons, to particularly the weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima. So it kind of brought it not necessarily full circle, but it tied in together, and you saw the importance of what you were doing, the implications of what you were doing, so the dangers. So yeah, it was fascinating.
That is really cool. I like that a lot. And we go from that to something a little less serious, but with equally big implications. In Vancouver at Geo-Congress 2024, we held the inaugural Matt Evans Hot Sauce Challenge, where Matt Evans, GI member Matt Evans, made 8 different varieties of hot sauce he gave them all names, but just generally, they went from hot to extremely hot. When we announced this, I got a text from Alan Rathje, and it said, "Is Russell entered in this? Because if he is, he's going to win." And those words turned out to be prophetic. We actually had 3 winners. We went 15 rounds, and Russell was one of our 3 winners. He gets free registration to Geotechnical Frontiers this year because of it. Russell, I want to hear the story of how you got to this point, because you were pretty much unfazed during 15 rounds of hot sauce consumption. What's the first spicy food you remember eating?
So, having grown up in upstate New York, buffalo wings came out, and that came out when I was young. And I don't think they started out as mild and hot, medium and hot. They just came out hot. And so I was eating buffalo wings from a very, very young age. But I also had chronic nosebleeds growing up. And as a result, my nose had been cauterized so many times that I think I had lost taste. And so I needed the spice in order to eat things and taste things. And so that just kind of, snowballed to the fact that almost everything that I eat has spice on it.
You've done a lot of traveling around the world, though. You've got to have an amazing list of the spiciest things you've ever had. What's up near the top?
So I'll tell you a story about traveling around the world that was interesting. I was in Wellington, New Zealand, and I went to a kebab place, and New Zealand has great food. And I noticed that at the bottom they had Diablo, and they had it for everything. So you could order their whatever you were going to get for the kebab, then you could get Diablo. So I did. And so first I asked what it was, and they said, "Oh, that's spicy." And I said, "Okay, yes." So I ordered my kebab platter and I ordered a Diablo. And I'm about halfway through it, and I'm thinking, this is actually pretty hot. I mean, it wasn't to the point that I couldn't eat it. I actually enjoyed it. And I went back up and I let them know after I finished, because you had to bring up your plates, that it was actually relatively hot. And they said, "Did you get the Diablo?" I didn't realize it was a food challenge. So I got my name like one of 3 people that was able to eat and complete the thing. And I didn't even know it was a challenge. So that I wouldn't say was the spiciest. It was spicier than I was expecting. The spiciest is I had a colleague at University of Michigan. Now he's actually dean at Duke University, and his wife is from the island of Mauritius. And they have some sort of paste that they kind of use on the side, and they kind of dip things in. So it's not very much. And I had gone to their house for dinner, and I really liked the paste. Well, she gave me like a quart jar of it. And it looked like spaghetti sauce, but there were certainly no tomatoes in that. And I actually used it as a spaghetti sauce. And I did eat the whole plate, but it was, that was probably the hottest. And they would eat a fraction of what I did that in the one sitting. So that jar would be like a lifetime supply. And I ate, I think, half a jar in one sitting.
So as that guy that eats spicy foods now, I'm sure you must have people coming to you with spicy stuff and saying, "Hey, Russell, eat this," just to see what happens, right?
Yeah.
How disappointed are people when you don't even react?
So most of the time it's the novelty things that have the name on it. And I don't really like the hot sauce that has vinegar in it. That's more like a salad dressing that I would use. So usually the ones that have the names on it are maybe hot, but they're not that flavorful or enjoyable. I don't think I've ever. So I was up in Iceland. In Iceland, the farther you are from the equator, the less spicy food is. And so in Iceland, the food is not spicy. So I usually travel with hot sauce, and I did in that case. And my colleague at the earthquake center there was interested in trying it, and I don't know if he was just humoring me, but he said he really enjoyed it. So I sent him a case of hot sauce when I returned, and it may still be sitting in the earthquake center on a shelf somewhere. But he kind of joined a club as a result. And when I went back up there, a subsequent visit, he had some stuff that was pretty hot and flavorful. But it was pepper X, so they hadn't named the pepper yet. But at that time, it was the hottest pepper on earth. And it was just essentially a jar of ground pepper X. And I ate about a third of the bottle at one sitting, and it was a tough go. So that was pretty tough.
So, we're not going to have the entire interview be about hot sauce here, but we do have to wrap with this one final thing. For all those people who are watching this thinking, there's got to be a commercially available hot sauce that I would enjoy, what would be your top recommendations for people?
I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it right, but it's El Yucatan. And they have 3 main versions and then another version. So the red, green, and brown. The brown is the good one. And then they have a black one, and the black one is even better if you can find it.
There you go. We will, of course, because that's the kind of people we are, put a link to El Yucatan down in the show notes below this so everybody can find it at their local stores or order it by mail if you need to. We have to talk a little bit more about earthquakes during this interview. We really could, Director's Cut is sports, music, and food at its heart, but we got to talk earthquakes today. Did a fellowship at the University of Canterbury in 2012, shortly after the 2011 Christchurch earthquake. Can you go through that? I mean, how were you there at that time specifically because of the earthquake? Was it a coincidence? And then what was that year like while you were there?
Yeah, so no, it wasn't a coincidence. So there was the University of Canterbury, I think, typically had 3 faculty in geotechnical engineering, and Rob Davis and John Barrow were 2 of them. And they worked largely focused on earthquake aspects. And it was unique. It was different than what anybody else was doing around the world. And they did some work that was related to my PhD work. So as a PhD student, I was in communication with both of them. And as a result, Rob Davis invited me to serve as an external examiner on one of his students' PhD committees. And so I ended up traveling down there. And so I had a fairly good relationship with the geotech faculty. And following the Darfield earthquake, so that was in September of 2010, I was asked by GEAR to lead the geotech contingent for the GEAR team. And that was largely because I had also did the previous one with Haiti as a member, not as a leader. Ellen Rapji was the leader and did a great job. And I think she may have recommended me, which I greatly appreciate. So, and because I had an association with the New Zealanders already and they spoke English, so language wasn't an issue. So that's how I started. So it started actually in 2010. And I actually did multiple times down there because their faculty, the university got hit pretty hard. Some of the faculty were leaving. So I ended up substituting in teaching, and I think I might have taught 5 different times down there. And that kind of subsidized my travel expenses and housing expenses, and then allowed me to perform collaborative research. And it was very fruitful. The absolutely great colleagues down there. And I wasn't really adding any new expertise, but I was adding more manpower. So they certainly were very capable and have world-class expertise, but they were limited in the manpower. And so I kind of contributed to that.
And you got your name on the wall at the kebab shop. Was it during
That's
that
right.
year, or was that a different time?
No, that was actually a subsequent time. There was some sort of collaborative research experience for students, and they were bringing U.S. students down to New Zealand to match with New Zealand students, and then touring different places. And that just happened to be one of the nights when we were in Wellington. So that was more recent.
Very good. I like that. The other question that we ask everybody when they come on the show is a nostalgia question. We get you to think back. How did you first get involved in ASCE and then GI?
So at RPI, the ASCE, the GI didn't exist at the time. ASCE did, and there was a student chapter, and Tom Zimmy at the time, I think, he had stated that he was the longest running faculty advisor for any ASCE student chapter. And he continued that up, I believe, up until his passing away. And so he did it years after I was there. So I was heavily involved in that, participated in the steel bridge. And even though I did take the geotech courses there, my main focus was on structures. And when they did start the institutes, I actually have a certificate somewhere that says I'm a chartered member of the Structural Institute, not the Geo-Institute, because it wasn't until later that I switched to the Geo-Institute.
That's not hanging on your wall anywhere, is
No,
it?
it's not. I would like to pull it out and show it to you. It's buried somewhere, but I do actually have it, and it does say charter member of the Structural Engineer Institute.
Maybe we'll have to send you another one that says something else about joining the Geo-Institute. Tom Zimmy, of course, an absolute institution at RPI. Do you have any Tom stories that you can share with everybody?
Yeah, they had a program there. They had some sort of fellowship to have a faculty go to lunch with students. And one week they would go to the faculty dining hall, and the other week they would go to the student dining hall. And I took the series, two sequential courses with Tom, and he put this offer out. And initially you get a lot of volunteers to go to lunch, but somewhere mid-semester, that kind of died down after everybody had gone once or so. And particularly for the weeks that were going to the student faculty dining facility as opposed to the faculty dining facility. So he and I would go and have lunch usually about once a week. And again, I was older, I was poor, I really appreciated the free meal. So anyway, we got to talk quite a bit. He was a great guy. He had served in the Army. So we talked about the military because I had been in the Marines. His classes were always entertaining. I think you would probably be fired if I told the jokes that he would tell during class if I did that today. But his courses were entertaining, and he had worked in practice and I think owned a few consulting firms, small consulting firms throughout the years. And so anyway, he was a nice man. I learned a lot from him, and it was appreciated the lunches.
That's amazing. That's great. We love having the chance to remember Tom whenever we get anybody on here that has a good RPI connection. The other topic we cannot go through the interview without discussing is antique cars. And when I say antique cars, you know, everybody drives around. I think in Virginia now, to get the antique license plate, generally it has to be 25 years old, right? So
Yes.
technically, if you had a 1998 Honda Civic right now, technically you could get an antique license plate on that car in Virginia. Yours, Russell, are slightly older than that. So I guess maybe the thing to do here is walk us through the cars that you have in your stable right now. And then I want to know what's the most challenging aspect of working on these things for you.
So the oldest one I have is a 1929 Ford Model A pickup. And I got that maybe about 4 years ago. The next oldest is a 1930 Model A Coupe, and I bought that when I was 14 years old. So I've had that for quite a while. And then when my son, you're able to drive in Virginia at 15 and a half. And so when he got his permit, we went out and bought him a 1968 Chevy pickup, but it needed to do work. And so my thought was, we'll learn to work on it together. He was okay with that, but he really just wanted a daily driver, and I was fine. So I got him another vehicle, and I took the 68 pickup truck. So I have two 1929, 1930, and a 1968 vehicles that I work on regularly. And as far as challenging, one, you can't bring them to anywhere to work on. No one knows what they're doing. So you're pretty much having to do it yourself, or finding someone that's particularly knowledgeable about that, and that's usually through the antique car clubs. You'll know someone. And you're continually working on them. So it's a full-time hobby just to keep them running. Realize they don't have oil filters. The oil is supposed to be changed every 500 miles. You're supposed to grease them every 500 miles. Those combined is about a half a day project, just taking the wheels off, greasing the bearings, readjusting the brakes. That you're investing 4 to 5 hours in that. If you're doing more maintenance, which often is the case, you're looking at a couple weeks worth of effort, and all of them I've done extensive work on.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of follow-up questions here. The first one is, how much is modern technology making it easier to work on these things? I mean, you mentioned no oil filters, right? The quality of motor oil now, I'm going to guess, is significantly better than it was in 1930. And I would guess a lot of the parts that you would buy now, even if they're made for antique vehicles, are much better quality. Has that made it significantly easier to work on these?
I think the biggest advance in technology is YouTube. So I'm able to watch a YouTube channel and learn how to do it. And also being able to order parts online. So I don't have to, find a paper catalog and order it through the mail. I can actually just order it online. So that's the biggest advantage of the technology. The reproduction parts aren't necessarily better. Matter of fact, I would say in many cases they're not as good. There are some things that are better, like the fan blades. You would prefer a modern fan blades as opposed to the originals, because the crystal structure wasn't great and the fan would break while it's spinning and fly through your hood of your vehicle. So there are some things that are better. The oil certainly is better. So I don't change my oil every 500 miles. And I actually did put an oil filter, but it's not a full flow. So it's just part of the oil just happens to get filtered through, not all of it. The tools certainly probably are, I think back in the day, you wouldn't spend the money on the tool. Now, if you're investing in the car, you'll go ahead and buy the right tool to be able to do it, as opposed to making things work.
So the other I could ask 50 follow-up questions about this, but I'm going to limit it to one. We have these two beautiful roads in Virginia. For those who don't know, one is called Skyline Drive, and it runs the length of Shenandoah National Park, and then it meets up with another one called the Blue Ridge Parkway at the southern terminus, which goes for, I think, about 450 miles to Smoky Mountain National Park. I am going to hazard a guess that you have had at least one of these vehicles on at least one of those roads. they're up and down, they're windy. What is that drive like with 1930s technology?
Oh, it is the best drive that you could have. So I've been on stretches of the Blue Ridge Parkway. I haven't made it as far north as the Shenandoah or Skyline Drive. But no, that is the best drive because you don't have someone right behind you that's tailgating you. You can cruise along, and they do fine at 30 to 45 miles an hour, and they're able to get up hills without any issues. You do have to modify the carburetors for the hill. And also I put on high compression heads. So it's looks like the original head, but the combustion chamber is a little bigger, so it gives you higher compression. And then I did flow tests on the valves in the carburetor and soldered them up and re-drilled those to get better flow to be able to get up and down the hill. So both of the older vehicles do really well on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it is the ideal drive.
And if anybody hasn't been on either one of these roads, I would say this is a trip that every American, well, everybody in the world, right? But if you live in the United States and you've been here for your entire life and you haven't been on either one of these roads, you should probably do it at some point. So we can put a link to that down in the show notes too. And Russell, I hope you don't get too many auto maintenance questions from people who are watching this. We got 3 questions left, and they're all pretty fun ones. We like to close on a high note here. You spent a lot of time in upstate New York. You spent a lot of time in Michigan. It's not very warm in either one of those places. A lot of people will know that. What is your threshold? How cold does it need to be for you to wear either a coat or hat or gloves? Do you have different thresholds for each?
So I actually do prefer it colder than warmer. To include indoors. So at our house at home, upstairs isn't heated, and usually the windows in the bedrooms are open. So whatever temperature is outside, the temperature is inside. And with that, you have to let the sinks drip in the bathroom so the pipes don't freeze. Toilets commonly freeze over. That's not uncommon. Downstairs is warmer. But coats, I would put on a coat probably the same as everybody else. As far as hats go, ball caps are what I typically wear outside, particularly because I'll get sunburned if I don't. So I use those. But I rarely ever wear a winter cap. I think you may call them toboggans from Michigan, but a knit type winter cap is something I usually don't ever wear. And gloves, yeah, it not very often. So it would have to be pretty cold in order to wear a winter hat and winter gloves.
So what I love about Director's Cut is I put these innocuous questions in there and something else becomes the lead story. And you handled that well with the second floor of your house. I'm impressed. I like that a lot. I will never be doing that myself, but I like that answer. I really like that. You mentioned earlier in the interview that you just came back from the West Coast, where the University of California was holding a memorial for Jim Mitchell. And this was a big thing. A lot of people came out to this. A lot of people spoke at it. A lot of people participated. Had to put a question in here about that, especially with you being at Virginia Tech. What are your top 3 Jim Mitchell memories?
Jim was a great guy, truly a gentleman and a scholar. So I was fortunate to be his student, and then I was fortunate to be his colleague and friend. As an advisor, I don't remember him ever telling me to do anything. I remember him letting me do what I wanted, but we would meet weekly and he would ask questions. And the questions that he asked was either because I was wrong or I didn't explain it well. And so in both cases, it guided me. And so really, he guided a lot of the work that I did through questions. And he did venture into earthquake engineering, but that wasn't his main focus. I had started in earthquake engineering and really took a lot of background courses in research prior to doing my PhD and joining his group. So it was always amazing how quick he picked things up and how pointed his questions were, and he really would narrow down on the important issues. And again, that's how he guided the research that I did, which was great. As far as colleague, I was fortunate to have great colleagues at the University of Michigan and also at Virginia Tech, and that includes all of them. Again, all the faculty, and that's a nice thing because that isn't the case for everybody that I know that's in academics, and so I'm very, very fortunate. And Jim ranks right up at the top of all of those as far as being a great colleague. He had a great sense of humor. He was nice. I remember when I was finishing my PhD, now I had already had the position at Michigan offered to me, and I had a start date. And so there was a lot of stress of wrapping up everything and getting it done. And as usual, things were taking longer than expected. So I was married. I owned a house here. I had a child. I needed to sell a house. I needed to buy a house. I needed to plan the move. So I remember trying to schedule my final defense date. And there was an optimal window in order to make the move, so I wouldn't have to go into a rental house. And he said, "Oh no, I have band camp that week." And I looked at him and was like, "What are you, 15? Band camp?" That didn't go over too well, but he took it okay, I guess. And then when I ended up coming back to Virginia Tech, we ended up sharing an office. They were doing remodeling in the Patton Hall, which is where civil engineering is located. And so we shared an office for about 2 months. And that was a little strange in that I was working out of the table that I used to meet with him as a student. It was nice. He was a great guy, and he's greatly missed. Another memory is right up to the end, we were working on 4 journal papers. And believe it was in November of 2003, he contacted me and he said, "Why don't you remove me from 3 of these papers? Let's just focus on this one." And I didn't quite understand that because I didn't see there was any hurry, but clearly he understood that the time was limited, and he passed away less than a month later. So even up to the point that he knew things weren't going well and he wouldn't be around long, he was working on stuff. He was contributing the same as he always did. So nothing changed from the time that I met him as a student to the time, unfortunately, that he passed away.
Which is absolutely incredible. I have to ask you about that 2-month stint that you guys shared the same office. Did you learn anything new about him during that time that you hadn't known before?
No, he was well retired, and so he would come in and he would try not to be in when I was there. So whether I was disturbing him or he thought he was disturbing me, no, other than he was very generous to make that offer and allow me to use his office.
Oh, I like that a lot. And we hopefully will have the Jim Mitchell tribute. I can't remember if you guys called it a symposium or what, but we'll just call it a session for right now. Hopefully that's going to be up on the Berkeley YouTube channel at some point here in the near future. We can share that with everybody when it becomes available. Now, you've mentioned a few times, we're going to wrap up with this question, which I like to close with these big, thoughtful questions that don't really have a set answer and let people pontificate about something that really deeply impacts the world, Russell. You spent these years of your life in Michigan. Your kids are huge Lions fans and Detroit sports fans in general. I grew up there. My dad's a big Lions fan. Are the Lions ever going to win a Super Bowl, Russell?
It was good. I thought this was the year. They won records this year as far as win-loss record goes. So it's the best seasons they've ever had. They have the talent. They have the coaches. So I really thought it was going to be this year. Everything is in place for next year. So there's no major changes. I know the coaching staff has shifted a little bit, but I don't think anything in a detrimental way. So I think everything is in place for next year. So I'm counting on next year being it.
What aspect of Lions fandom shocked you the most when you got to Michigan? Because it's a different mentality. I want to remind everybody out there that until last year, they had won 1 playoff game in 55 seasons. One, everybody. So Russell, what surprised you the most about the mentality of the Lions fans?
You have to be dedicated. My two boys are certainly that every year, and these are through some pretty disappointing years. I forget. I think it was Dan Campbell's first year as coach. His record, I don't know if it was 6-0 for the first 6 games, but I mean it was pretty dismal. No, they were still dedicated. Every Sunday they were there, rooting them with their jerseys on. So they are truly dedicated fans. They're not bandwagon fans.
You could see them on Thanksgiving every year.
Yes.
There are no more. The paper bags on the heads was a big thing in the 80s. That has fortunately not happened in a long time, I think. Well, maybe 2008 when they went 0-16. That was really the last time I think it got absolutely abysmal. So, and yes, shout out to Dan Campbell for really turning it around. That first season, I think they were 2-7 and they finished 8-8 or something crazy like that.
They turned it around about mid-season. But the first part of the season was pretty bad.
So I'm going to say someday it's going to happen, right? We saw it with the Cubs. It took 108 years, but it did materialize. The Lions and the Browns are the only two teams that have existed since the beginning of the Super Bowl era that have never even played in a Super Bowl. And one of them's got to end this sometime soon, and I don't think it's going to be the Browns first.
No, I certainly hope it's the Lions. They deserve it.
So, Russell, you made it through all 10 questions, all the follow-ups, all the bonuses I throw in, and you did a great job. And the world now knows a lot more about Russell Green. They've got your hot sauce recommendations, and they learned a lot about old cars, I think, too, which is amazing. We haven't had good car talk on Director's Cut in a long time. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw today, and I always say you're here at the end, so you probably did, click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will, of course, let you know every time something new is posted to the YouTube channel. Russell, thank you so much for doing this. I hope it was fun.
It was. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
It was great to have you, and of course, we will be back in just 7 days, 1 week, with another brand new episode of Director's Cut.